Lucky hit. Ryazan is on fire. The local oil refinery is on fire.
Of course, good.
Perm cry. Petroleum products burn like sparklers. German missiles for Ukraine. Sensational statement by Merz.
We agreed not to discuss the details publicly as we believe that a certain ambiguity is necessary for the Russian side.
The partnership is over. The attack MS strike on Voronezh did its job.
We of course consider this an American strike on our territory, which naturally does not contribute to the development of our relations.
Berlin is ready for war against Putin? Exclusive details.
The soldiers practiced real urban combat with irregular forces in conditions as close to reality as possible.
America has shocked the world. The US is creating a new fighter jet.
According to Trump, the F-47 will have next-level stealth, insane speed, and features that no one else on the planet possesses.
Right now, friends, we're going to discuss the state of the front and not just talk about it. About what is happening in Donbas, which, according to Trump, should either be surrendered or leased to Putin. By the way, if you haven't heard this theory, stay tuned for our studio discussion. Yes, you heard that right. And we'll also talk about the battle for Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian armed forces are in a critical situation there, but they are not allowing the Russian army to claim victory, so the Russians are trying to attack from two sides. There were also strikes on the Ryazan oil refinery, and near Perm, a train carrying fuel was effectively destroyed. All the military details are in the report. Ukrainian long-range drones are cutting off electricity in the occupied Donbas.
In short, charge your phones. Looks like they've decided to cut off our power everywhere. I've already lost count after 30 of them.
And Ukrainian cruise missiles are stopping the sale of Russian oil. In the port of Novorossiysk. The Ukrainian defense industry is developing rapidly. Kyiv is increasing its capability to strike deep into Russian territory.
Come on, man. Robbery. Oh yeah. Courage.
Look.
Where have we ended up? What a ride. Oh, come on, mother. This is Belgorod in short. This color is not available anywhere in Belgorod.
The only argument in any negotiations and agreements with the aggressor is the powerful Ukrainian army and its own large-scale production of long-range weapons.
In order to somehow bring this war to a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at enterprises of Russia's military-industrial complex and its energy system.
For strikes on military targets of the occupiers in the occupied territories, as well as in Russia's border regions, long-range and rocket drones are mainly used. Bars, Polyanitia, Pekla, FP1, FP2, and Layuti. The scale of strike drone production in Ukraine is such that Russia, including Moscow, is visited by hundreds of drones almost daily. Cities like Moscow and Leningrad, which are the most protected by Russian air defense systems, could start getting hit every evening. Bars could arrive without it necessarily happening systematically. In addition to drones, Ukraine has established production of its own cruise missiles. We're talking about the long-range Neptune with an increased range of up to 1,000 kilometers and a warhead of about 260 kilograms. And of course, the Flamingo with a strike range of up to 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000 kilogram warhead.
Usually, the warhead of a modern cruise missile is 450, at most 500 kilograms. As a rule, almost all missiles have a 450 kilogram warhead. So what does a 1-ton warhead provide? If it hits a target, for example, an industrial facility, 2 such missiles will completely disable it for at least a year. That is, there will be a single crater about 20 meters in diameter.
From time to time, Western allies' weapons are used in strikes on military targets in Ukraine. These include the British-French Storm Shadow missiles, as well as the American ATA-CMS, which the Ukrainian armed forces recently used to strike Voronezh.
Guys, we're being bombed right now. We're being bombed, everyone.
Recently, Russian energy infrastructure facilities have increasingly come under fire from the Ukrainian armed forces. By cutting off electricity to Ukrainians, Putin is dooming Russians to blackouts. With
regard to the climatic features of the Russian Federation and the tactical and technical characteristics of the Ukrainian side's strike capabilities, the Russian Federation is facing a harsh winter, both literally and figuratively. First and foremost, these are thermal power plants and other production facilities that support the vital functions of major Russian cities.
Pavel Lakichev is joining our broadcast, an expert you know well, the head of security programs at the Center for Global Studies Strategy 21st Century. Pavel, hello. We're glad to see you.
Likewise, good evening. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Well, let's talk about Pokrovsk, a part of Donbas that, according to Trump, Putin should be allowed to lease. That's a bit of a reference further back, but still. Here, they're writing some interesting analysis. Information that the complete encirclement of the Ukrainian group did not happen either in Mirnograd or near Pokrovsk, but the armed forces of Ukraine brought in reserves there and as a result freed up some other areas. Sections of the front, let's say, making them more thinly held. And now Russian troops are gathering in Pokrovsk. They may launch an offensive towards the village of Ryazan, where Ukrainian forces are stationed, who have been sent there to block Mirnograd. Could you please tell us what you can share about the situation in Pokrovsk and specifically the Russian reserves accumulating there? Where might they move next?
You see, you correctly pointed out that Pokrovsk is not isolated. It's part of the entire front line. On the one hand, if we look at the fighting around Pokrovsk, it covers the whole front, starting from Huliapol and at least up to Lyman. Perhaps the Kupiansk direction and further north can be considered separately, but it still affects everything. Yes. The previous significance of Pokrovsk as a logistics hub, which it had before the Russians cut off the Pokrovsk-Kostiantynivka route as a hub for Donetsk, Chasiv Yar, and Kostiantynivka, has been lost. But Pokrovsk still remains a significant and strategically important flanking fortified area for the entire defensive line, located to the north of Drushkivka-Kostiantynivka, as well as Drushkivka-Kramatorsk. It's certainly no coincidence that when the 51st Army was tasked with the important mission of encircling Pokrovsk from the north, they discovered a significant gap in our defensive formation to the north and subsequently sent part of their military forces toward Drushkivka and Dobropilia. That's turning to another corner. So, well, that was a false start. They wanted to bite off more than they could chew. But this actually revealed the concept behind their plan. And Pokrovsk, as well as Mirnograd, and then once this threat is removed, the enemy forces then move to the rear areas of Kostiantynivka and Drushkivka, as well as the entire grouping of our forces in that region, thus ultimately forcing us to withdraw from this pocket. That's why Pokrovsk remains an extremely important and strategically significant defensive stronghold for our operations. That is precisely the reason why the command continues to hold and reinforce the Pokrovsk defensive line, maintaining its position and ensuring that it remains under our control, despite ongoing challenges and threats in the area. Despite heavy losses and the difficulty of holding it, the enemy has significant superiority there. Now, as for how the Russians are acting, here too we need to break it down into two parts, and probably we'll leave the 51st Russian Army there for now. Let's start with the Second Army, the combined arms army that is advancing from the south, which previously tried to encircle Pokrovsk from the south, attempted to approach from the southwest to cut off the Pokrovsk-Pavlograd highway, but without success. In the end, after failing to encircle from the north as well, they decided to launch a frontal assault from the south. What is now being called infiltration? The way the tactics of entering the city have changed is not a feature of the Russian assaults. It's a feature of our defense, which allows for this kind of infiltration. That's a drawback. And yes, the Russians managed to infiltrate the city and build up their forces there. Judging by the actions of our command, the number one priority in Pokrovsk, the first level, is to hold the northern part of Pokrovsk and the industrial zone, and to push the Russians out of there. Why? in order to maintain a corridor to Mirnorad. Mirnorad, it's a kind of stronghold in the east, and it's holding out more firmly. But if the Pokrovsk gates are closed, then Mirnorad will end up surrounded. That's why it's essential to keep the corridor in Pokrovsk open. The second option, of course, is to move our forces from Mirnorad to Pokrovsk. With these forces, we could reinforce the flanks on the Pokrovsk arc. That's a solution, but it's still questionable. Nevertheless, by tying up our forces in the city, the Russian Second Army continues its attempts to bypass Pokrovsk from the west and southwest, encircling it and moving onto the Pokrovsk-Pavlohrad highway. Meanwhile, from the north, the 51st, which its main objective is to encircle Pokrovsk from the north, part of its military forces advance towards Dobropilia, where our brave brigades continue to break them up, destroy, and rout them. By and large, prisoners of war, mostly Russian, from this direction in recent weeks continue their attempts to encircle Pokrovsk from the north. They are not succeeding. Moreover, I think that here we also have a particularly powerful potential reserve, because when the same Azov, the Azov Corps, and the brigades that are currently destroying the enemy's Dobropilia salient finish this important task, their natural movement will be southward, thus continuing to cut off the 51st salient as well. The army is trying to envelop Pokrovka, Mirny, Rada, and the northern part, including Narodinska in particular. The Russians understand this and are pulling reserves into the fighting, specifically the 155th Marine Brigade from Vladivostok and the 40th Marine Brigade, which has arrived from Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky. These are forces that are no longer intended for breaking through defenses, but for entering the operational space. These are the second echelons. In other words, the task of maximally disrupting and undermining the offensive potential of the Russian assault army is being carried out by our forces, no matter what. The first stage of an operation is always the most difficult, because the enemy always has the largest reserves, which are planned for the second, third, and fourth stages. And he keeps pushing through, spending them in the initial battles. Will we be able to hold Pokrovsk? I don't know. That's a difficult question. But I repeat, the situation with the defense of Kostiantynivka and Druzhkivka depends on Pokrovsk. And in this way, if you look from the entire northern Donbas, so-called fortress lines, which were used for defense.
Pavel, there's something else I want to ask you about. There is a truly unique video showing how Ukrainian drones eliminate 15 Russian infantrymen during fog near Pokrovsk. Yes, obviously we can't show the video, but still. And Kirill Gudanov as well. By the way, he mentioned that the landing of the GUR paratroopers from a helicopter in Pokrovsk was the only way to turn around a very difficult situation in the city and allowed the main forces to be brought in. Obviously, Gerasimov has already reported to Putin several times that the city has been taken, but as we can see from the footage, this does not correspond to reality. Could you please tell us in general what special operations are currently, in your opinion, are they necessary in order to hold Pokrovsk? Or are there other maneuvers available to Ukraine's defense forces that would allow them to preserve both personnel from what you see and also including to withdraw to fortified positions? Because many people say that beyond Pokrovsk, that's it. There's a direct road to Dnipro, and that's almost a collapse.
Well, first of all, that's not true. Yes, in terms of physical and geographical conditions, yes, towards Pavlohrad, in the direction of Pavlohrad, there is a valley there. That's convenient for drone operators. But actually, towards Pavlohrad, in the Dnipropetrovsk region, there are defensive lines that have been established. And if our forces withdraw towards Pavlohrad, it's unlikely that Putin will be able to push further into the Dnipropetrovsk region. But that's not Russia's main objective. If they take Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad, they will turn north and repeat the same false start towards Dobropilia, thus cutting off all our defenses, Kostiantynivka, Dobropilia, the southern direction, it's all very difficult there as well. So that's what's on everyone's mind right now. Only about Druskivka. In Big Druskivka, if they turn around again, then all our defenses, Kostiantynivka, Druskivka, Kramatorsk, will first have to be withdrawn. We are ready to actually lose something to break this defensive line. No, this is a very difficult dilemma. Either we hold on here and maintain the front, or the front collapses over a large section, the most fortified, the most prepared section.
All right, yes, well, Pavel, let me see.
Here's
Something else. Please go ahead.
As for special operations, well, this is a military operation. Special operations, not only BUR, the Ministry of Defense, but other special forces were also sent to Pokrovsk. Why? Because in urban combat conditions, these are battles tailored for special forces, essentially. These are pairs, trios, small groups that need to be managed, and communication with them must be organized. That's why at the most difficult moment of the defense of Pokrovsk, during this infiltration, it was decided to reinforce Pokrovsk's defenses with special forces units. The GUR, the SPU, there was the Center, Alpha was working there. Border Guard special forces, even police units, if I'm not mistaken. All possible special forces units that could be gathered were deployed into action to turn the tide of the situation in the intense urban fighting, specifically in Pokrovsk.
Pavel, here's what I want to ask you. Last night, drones attacked Ryazan. Preliminarily, the local oil refinery was hit. They are writing about this, saying it's important for the Russian republics. In addition, there were explosions in Novomoskovsk, which is in the Tula region. Also in Ryazan, Kursk region, there was a fire at a substation. And of course, we can't fail to mention the destruction of a train near Perm, a railway train that was transporting petroleum products. I want to ask you all this as a concluding question in the context of Germany transferring long-range missiles. Friedrich Merz spoke about this. Please tell me, do you think these strikes on the Russian Federation will continue despite news about certain plans or attempts to pressure Ukraine into something? And most importantly, do we have room to expand the geography with the help of such gifts? Let's put it that way, though gifts is probably not the best word in this context. Let's say such transfers from Germany.
As for the word merci, if he says, for instance, we will transfer missiles, or perhaps we will not transfer, well, generally speaking, there are three different types there. And looking ahead, for the Germans right now, the main cruise missile and the long-range one is the Taurus. There are several important developments that will be put into operation and put into service in the near future. The years 1927 to 1930. So when Merz says that we will help Ukraine with long-range missiles, but it won't be Taurus, well, you can understand that this is about the long-term perspective. And as for Western weapons, let's put it this way, Western weapons are good. By the way, regarding the strike on Voronezh, our command stated that it was an ATAK MS. Some Russians accepted this, while others started saying it was a Ukrainian ballistic missile, the Hrom-2, and there's a lot of debate about it in the Z channels. Why? Because it's hard for Russians to accept that Ukrainians have their own ballistic missiles. But it's even harder to accept that Ukrainians continue to use American weapons. So between two bad options, they come up with something that's less bad. Nevertheless, we must carry out deep strikes with our own weapons. Here, Lloyd Austin, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, was very clear when the question about ATAK MS came up. For the first time, he clearly said, Ukrainians, it's difficult for us at this particular moment to provide you with ATACMS. However, you already possess your own effective means of striking, for which you absolutely do not require anyone's permission to use. You will strike precisely where you need to and exactly when you need to. This is the key element of deep strike, and not just deep strike alone. We also have our special services, which can organize other methods of sabotage and destruction of military and military industrial targets, and many more of them. Let me remind you, just a few days ago, there was a sabotage in Khabarovsk Krai, a sabotage on the Trans-Siberian Railway that's in the east, the Far East. Even earlier, there were strikes on the location of the 155th Marine Brigade of the Pacific Fleet near Vladivostok. Operation Web, obviously they know everything about it, will go down as a classic of intelligence agency work, and such operations will continue no matter what happens. Whether our partners, or partners in quotes, can and actually want to help us, but for the sake of defending Ukraine, for the sake of our ongoing and determined struggle for freedom and sovereignty, the Ukrainian Defense Forces will, with unwavering resolve, strike at the Russian military-industrial complex, targeting its vital infrastructure and at its oil industry as well, in order to cut off this crucial dollar flow that is fueling the war. And in other areas as well, both military and economic, the defense forces will act decisively. These actions are necessary to weaken the enemy's capacity to wage war and to protect the future of Ukraine.
All right, Pavel, I have a final question for you. Please tell me, Europe has now responded, it seems unequivocally, that concessions of Ukrainian territory are unacceptable. And all of this. In principle, the European Union does not accept this, even though it's only being discussed in the media for now, but people are talking about it a bit too actively, aren't they? What do you think from a military point of view? Is it even realistic that Ukraine could somehow be forced to withdraw from Donetsk region and leave troops there? Does such a mechanism even exist at all? Or is this all just theory and political statements?
The mechanism? Well, Putin wants to implement this mechanism. Gerasimov reported to him that Pokrovsk is already surrounded and destroyed. Kupiansk is surrounded and destroyed, so that's the mechanism. The mechanism is an offensive which Putin is not abandoning as a plan unless the Ukrainians themselves. They'll eventually go somewhere beyond the boundaries of the Donetsk region. We just talked about it. You expressed your concerns. But the Russians are in Pokrovsk, so what do you think will happen next? Next, Pavlograd, Dnipro? Next up is Zaporizhia. Further on, there is Kharkov, then Poltava, and after that, the region known as the Sums. But where exactly are the guarantees or assurances that we are looking for?
None. It is clear, therefore, that the question is rhetorical. Thank you. Well, I wanted to discuss this with you as a conclusion. Pavel Akischuk, military expert, head of programs at the Center for Global Studies and Strategy of the 21st Century. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Peaceful skies to all of us.
Likewise.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.